That's better. There we go. Okay, so it's working this time. There's always the odd little kerfuffle at the moment. Um, I'm sure we will figure it out. All right, then. Welcome back. If you've seen any of the others, this is the third and probably our final test. If everything goes well today, then we will. Here we go. Let's just share that with you all. If everything goes well today, then we will be probably streaming 4 to 5 days a week, probably at about this time. So that's at the moment, it's 1 p.m. GMT, it's 2 p.m. Central European, and it's 8 a.m. Eastern Standard. We'll see what we shall see. We're recording an open creel still at the moment by H.T. Sheringham, Hugh Tempest Sheringham. What a name. What a name. Lovely turn of phrase. It's a book about fishing that's over 100 years old. It's the fourth one of these that we've recorded. The others are all available already, and when we've done all of his work, eventually we'll pull that together into a box set. But for today, we are back into Hugh Tempest Sheringham. Now, if anybody wonders what's going on here, what you're looking at is in the middle of my screen, which you can see at the moment. You can see the text itself. On the top left of the screen over here, this is my digital audio workstation or DAW. That's the bit that does the actual recording. You can see me in the corner. This is the microphone this is the pop shield in the very end of the microphone here. I work with a Sennheiser 416, which suits my voice and my space very well, I think. Other microphones are available. Okay, so a quick sip of the old voice juice, which happens to be cranberry, because I've found after lots of toing and froing and trying and things that cranberry juice works best for me. Some people have green apple, some people have sort of various citrus things. Everybody's got their own thing. Cranberry seems to work well for me. Okay, that's because it reduces mouth noise. Because it's acidic, it provokes the saliva glands to produce a bit more saliva, so that leaves less work for my editor to do afterwards. Okay, so we'll just make sure we're where we are. Yeah, nobody's in yet, but that's absolutely cool. Okay, so back to the world of H.T. Sheringham. Let's just check where we were on the last, how we were sounding on the last. Ever had. Oh, yes, he had a lovely day, didn't he? Okay. So here we go. Actually, let's bring that across there. I kind of trust it now that we're hardwired. So you don't need to be seeing extras of me. Okay, here we go. It would help if I was on the right program when I pressed record. There we go. Chapter 6, Dry Fly Meditations. 1. The Day of Reckoning. And I have a burp. Excuse me. Happens a lot after lunch, sadly. I do apologise, but can't leave it around there. Here we go. April is almost upon us, and it is time to prepare for the beginning. I say this without prejudice to the fact that it was time 6 weeks or more ago. There are methodical anglers who seized it then by the forelock, but these words are not intended for them. They are addressed to the weaker brethren, those who let I dare not wait upon I will, those who hold... Those was a bit weird. Those who hold that sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Those who, like myself, have skeletons in their tackle cupboards. In the words of the song, let us all be happy to... Unhappy, not happy. I don't know which song that is. Let us all... Here we go. Let us all be unhappy together, for now is our day of reckoning. There is no doubt that the methodical ones have the better of us. We do not often admit it, because your man of method is a vexatious being at times, and is curious about many matters of trifling importance, such as punctuality for dinner and the disposition of effects in the sitting-room which you share with him at the fishing-inn. He has been known to remove your reel, with an expression of dumb suffering, from the breakfast table to the mantelpiece. He also. Um, oh, good. I'm glad it's sounding good. Thank you. Um, you render those files. Have a good edit. That's Liz, my beautiful wife and editor, in the chat. I'd better carry on. He also has prejudices about boots and slippers, and on arrival he always spends in unpacking a valuable half-hour which could have been devoted to immediate angling. These things, however, are by the way, and at this moment he is, without cavil or question, our superior, for he is ready and can await the opening day with a calm mind. For the rest of us, all is now fret and fever. Our rod, it is suddenly discovered, is by no means fit for service. Its whippings have begun to go, its varnish is chipped, its end rings are worn into grooves bad enough to ruin the dressing of that new line which, oh, cripes, that's a sentence without a stop. Need to find somewhere to breathe there. There. We'll cut in there. Varnish is chipped. Where is that? There we go. Varnish is chipped. Its end rings are worn into grooves bad enough to ruin the dressing of that new line which has to be bought and put onto the reel after it has been cleaned and put in order. Can the tackle maker effect the necessary repairs by the last day of March at latest? The question is asked in a shamefaced way, because we know that the demand is not reasonable, and that we ought to have looked into the matter in January. And when he replies vaguely, alleging the press of similar work which occupies all hands, the length of time which varnish takes in drying, and other things as obstacles to a definite promise, we leave the matter in his hands with a shrug of resignation, or else decide that the rod must go through one more season unrepaired. In that case, we shall suffer for it, as was foreseen, and probably shall, after all, have to send it into hospital just before the mayfly season, or the annual holiday, or at some other time of special inconvenience. And in either case, one result will probably be a new rod, not brought. Bought as a temporary substitute for the old favourite. More than once, I grieve to confess, have I been betrayed into such wanton extravagance in this way. Of subsequent developments there is no end, for the new rod requires a special line to suit it, probably a new reel, and then very likely spoils our holiday by refusing to fall in with our ways. At any rate, if we do not get all the sport we expected, than which nothing is more probable, we shall explain the fact by adverse comments on the new rod. Rod, reel, and line are unfortunately. Okay, sit back. Rod, reel, and clip that off on the recording. Let's go again. Rod, reel, and line are, unfortunately, not the whole of it. There are many other matters which require attention. The landing net, for instance, seems to have occupied the winter in breaking its meshes, and now displays 4 or 5 well-developed holes. But for the merest accident, these might have been overlooked, and so might the very insecure... and so might the very insecure condition of the knuckle joint. Even as it is, we... Oh, kicked my water bottle. Juice bottle. Even as it is, we know not when we may see the net again, once it has joined the rod and reel in the repairer's hands, so there will very likely be... Love those older turns of phrase. So there will very likely be a new net, not a new set. So there will very likely be a new net inscribed on that little account. The oil bottle, really oil bottles one way and another are the plague of a fisherman's life, is lost. It may be somewhere or it may not, and it is safer to assume that it will not turn up before April. Item: a new oil bottle. The spring balance is, alack, all rusty, as well it may be, for now one comes to remember— that was a bit hesitant on the comes. For, now one comes to remember, it fell into the river on the last day of last season, and was only rescued with difficulty. The mishap was clean forgotten, and no steps were taken to prevent mischief ensuing. Now arises the question, can one trust a rusty balance? No, a new one is essential. A search for or examination of. A search for or examination of other small necessaries, not necessities, necessaries. A search for or examination of. A search for or examination of other small necessaries, not necessities. A search for or examination of other small necessaries, such as tweezers, dampers, and the like, leads one on to repetition of the same melancholy determination, and then one turns gloomily to the gut and flies. At the beginning of a recent season, I devised a very crafty scheme. Inability to say whether any given strand of gut was thicker or finer than any other, except in the case of salmon and drawn gut, has long been a grave trouble to me, so I determined to strain my eyes no more, but to throw the responsibility on the merchants of gut. Therefore I laid in a stock of picked hanks, making the dealer label each in a large round hand, so that, should I by chance— a bit hesitant on that, should I? Should I by— oh, something went wrong there. That's the should I. I should punch in there. Should I by chance be found fishing with a cast tapering the wrong way, the blame should not rest with me. The scheme, I submit, was a sound one, but what is to be done now that all the labels have apparently been torn off and all the different sizes of gut mixed up at various moments of excitement during fishing? The expense of repeating those hanks will be prodigious, but I see no other remedy. Disentanglement and relabelling of the old stock would be too much for anyone. I hope no other anglers are in— sounding like somebody's drunken uncle there. I hope no other anglers are in such a predicament. I hope no other anglers are in such a predicament, but I fear it is a fond hope. In any case, most of us will have the fly trouble in common. The way flies will get into the wrong places, both in book and box, is almost past bearing. There are, I see, many hours of patient labour before me in sorting my scattered collection. Some of them have wandered away into matchboxes, cardboard minnow boxes, and other irregular places from which they must be retrieved. Then there is the question of the half-used fly. Take that medium olive. It is a bit draggled, yet not so bad, but it might be worse. Probably it has never yet caught a fish, though it has covered a few. Is it too battered for further service? Service, not surface. Is it too battered for further service? It might come in, perhaps, someday, not Sunday. Is it too battered for further service? It might come in, perhaps, some day when the fish are well on. Will the fish, not fish. How the fish have a name? Will the fish ever be well on? And, granting that they will not— Ew, I'm all over it this morning. Will the fish ever be well on? And, granting that they will not, would ever put— dear me. Will the fish ever be well on? And, granting that they will not, would one ever put such a fly on first? It is a difficult problem, and the worry of it helps to make. Not helps make, helps to make. It is a difficult problem, and the worry of it helps to make the rest of the fly question unendurable. There is one way out. A complete new set of the indispensable flies arranged in a new box by the tackle maker. In the abstract, the approach of the trout season is a thing full of holy joy, and we all freely admit that we are glad of it. Yet it brings troubles to us weaker brethren. I have serious thoughts of becoming a man of method after this year. 2. April. There are 2 Aprils. There is an April of dream and delight, when a warm sun alternates with soft showers, when a man can actually see the young green things growing apace, when the water meadows seem fair meads refreshed by rills of paradise, and when the trout rise steadily from mid-morning until tea-time. Then a man may angle with confidence, secure in hooks of practical size and gut of sensible texture, for at the beginning of the ideal season, fish are bold feeders. Winter has been a time of sleep and of forgetting, and they hold no painfully acquired theories about gossamer points or microscopic flies. At the beginning of his education, a child accepts the false as readily as the true, and so the trout. So also the angler, and hence this suggestion of an April day of which all men must have had experience in December reverie. Possibly some few, far back in their lives, may have met with it in its right place. I remember a single, glorious basket of 5.5 brace, good fish all, which once made a perfect April day unforgettable for me. But it is years ago, and my business is with the present and the other Aprils that disgrace it. On Monday, I awoke to the intelligence, gleaned from a halfpenny journal, that an earthquake had shaken the fisheries to their foundations. It had been likened, in some northern town, to the sound of an approaching motor car, and in the south was thought to be a sufficient explanation of a recent sluggishness in the Itchen trout. Coming events cast their shadows before, and several excellent anglers were vexed thereby. But now that the phenomenon was past and over, doubtless all would be well, and the wind might be less violent. Breathe, and a small burp, excuse me. It's the post-lunch burp. Okay, where are we? In this sanguine, double check it. Sanguine. 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 Sanguine.
Sanguine.
Yes, sanguine. Yeah. Come back up here. In this sanguine temper we drove to the water, assuring. We're not terribly assuring, we're not assuring, we're assuring. In this sanguine temper we drove to the water, assuring one another that the breeze which met us was only the slight disturbance of air natural to higher ground, and that the river valley would be unprofaned by rude zephyrs. More or less we kept this fiction up until we stood in a row on the river bank, clutching our hats and buttoning up our coats against Euroclydon or Euroclydon? Let's find out. Euroclydon. Yep, Euroclydon. Go from clutching. Clutching our hats and buttoning up our coats against Euroclydon. Oh, very sloshy. Clutching our hats and buttoning up our coats against Euroclydon. Then we said no more and parted. About 11:30, I stood in an orchard at the corner of a copse, and there saw the first rise. I put on a fly, tups indispensable, and pick it up from there. I put on a fly, tups indispensable, and essayed to cover the fish, cutting upstream across the wind in masterly fashion. I suppose I was a little too masterly, for the fly sought shelter in a sturdy young oak, and found it. My season on the Itchen had now definitely begun in the usual manner, and I left the tup where he was, replacing him by a hare's ear. The fish rose again, and I rapidly lengthened line to cover him until the hare's ear reached the self-same oak, and my cast came back without its point. I repaired damages, put on a medium olive, and took the utmost precaution to avoid hitting the copse, not corpse. Why would it hit the corpse? I repaired damages, put on a medium olive, and took the utmost precaution to avoid hitting the copse any more, with the result that the olive got doubled up by the wind, cracked off, and flew into space. I then decided that the orchard was not a good place, and went away downstream to look for a better. At last I came to a spot where the stream widened out, flowing deep and rather quiet under my own bank, on which were three little bushes, and just outside. And just outside each bush a fish was feeding. Here the wind promised to be helpful, so I hurriedly put on another tup and cast at the lowest trout. But the wind helped too much. Line and fly fell in with a heavy splash, and the fish went down. Number 2 went down in the same way. Number 3, however, was covered properly, rose, plunged, and was gone. Then I examined the fly and found that it had neither point nor barb, a fact of some importance that should have been ascertained earlier. After this, for some time, I saw no more rises, but about 1 o'clock the fish began to move on a shallow lower down. In 3 minutes they were boiling all over the place, and in 5 I had lost my nerve, casting wildly against a wind which shrieked almost straight across the river, striking with frantic futility. What a wonderful phrase. Oh, it helps if you're already in the right place. Striking with frantic futility whenever a trout mumbled at the medium olive which I had put on, and generally making an exhibition of myself. I had a premonition that the rise would be a short one, and in consequence a wild desire to make the most of it, which was fatal. During the half hour I only landed one fish, and that was a lean fellow, which it would have been a pity to kill. How many fish should have been landed? How many fish? How many fish? How many fish should have been landed I know not, but there were certainly several good rises among many that were by no means good. At 1:30 the river might have been empty of fish for all the sign there was of them. One trout was seen to rise quietly under the opposite bank about 1:45, and he was the last. Nor when he was in the net did he appear to be in condition yet, so he too went back, and my basket was a blank. From 2 to 7 is 5 hours, a long time to stand about waiting for a chance rise, and I need only add that the chance rise did not come. On Tuesday, I was informed that the journal which had told us about the earthquake spoke of local showers, weather decidedly warmer. Therefore, I put on thicker raiment and superimposed a mackintosh. Both safeguards were justified, for the wind had increased and was bitter, though changed in direction, while the local showers began as we stepped into the trap after breakfast and were going on when we got out of it in the evening. In reviewing Monday's events, I said that 5 hours, from 2 till 7, are a long time to wait for a rise. It is hardly necessary to suggest that 8 hours, from 11 to 7, are longer still. That was the period devoted by me to the business on Tuesday, my chief distractions being the hurricane, the local showers, and a wonder when the decidedly warmer part of the day was to be expected. I learnt afterwards that there was a hatch of fly on a higher reach of the water, and that I learnt afterwards that there was a hatch of fly on a higher reach of the water, and that it resembled the one on Monday, both in character and duration. But I cannot speak from my own knowledge. I saw one iron blue at 11:30 a.m. and two medium olives at 1:05. Yes, we realised it just says 1:5, doesn't it? But it means 1:05. That's a whole phrase. We really need to start the start of it. But I cannot speak from my own knowledge. I saw one iron blue at 11:30 a.m. and two medium olives at 1:05 p.m. I caught one little trout by casting at a venture in a carrier and transferred him to the main stream. I also failed to land another. For the rest, I did not see a sizable trout move all day. The wind was unspeakable, the local showers were penetrating, and the decidedly warmer clause must have referred, not revered. Pick it up from the D. The local showers were penetrating, and a decidedly warmer clause must have referred to some other part of Hampshire. Altogether, the day was a sad experience. While the seas... Ooh, excuse me, it's that burping thing going on again. Let's chop in there. While the season on any dry fly water begins in April, I suppose one is certain to be tempted out in spite of all suffering. But the man who resolutely declines to visit the chalk stream before May is wise in his generation. A cold, windy, rainy day is bad enough in itself. When the actual amount of fishing that one can do in it is limited to about half an hour of unsatisfactory and nerve-trying excitement, the question whether it is worth it becomes rather pressing. A day is not without thought to be sacrificed for 30 minutes fishing. Those fortunate ones who live close at hand and can go out for the rise, leaving the river when it is over, may take advantage of April's brief opportunities with an equal mind, but the angler from a distance would be less irritated by beginning in May. Yet, say the comforters, even in April are there days on which the rise lasts for 4 hours or more. They would be of more value if they had not always occurred during the previous week, when one was not there to enjoy them. 3. A Memory of June. The perfect mayfly day is a thing of moods, of sun, cloud, light airs, and cool, deep shades beneath trees in their first fullness of foliage. It is also, of course, a thing of trout, once in a lifetime perhaps, of as many trout as a man cares to catch, of trout until he grows weary of catching. My memory does not hold many instances of weariness attendant on the capture of trout, and only one wherein the mayfly played a conspicuous part. But that instance stands by itself, underlined twice in red, once for the day, once for the trout, and once in black for myself. It was an odd day, snatched from fate, so to speak. I had started out to fish a certain water of an orthodox dry fly kind, a straight half-mile, a curly corner, another straight half-mile, and so on. In its way, it was very nice, but to my thinking, which is, I fear, not the right thinking, it was a trifle dull. There were no surprises about the water, and no obstacles to speak of. The fish just rose at one side, in the middle, or at the other side. One just cast over them with precision, and nothing happened. The fish, in fact, knew a thing or two, more things than I did, which one is apt to resent in mayfly time. I had no great hopes of the venture, and was there just because in the first week of June one must be. By a train of events which was curious but does not concern the narrative, to me, thus pessimistic, came an opportunity of trying the water below the bridge. I emphasize these words because every good angler must know their significance. Must is important. I can probably sell them a bit more. Yeah. It's really solid. The water below the bridge. I emphasize these words because every good angler must know their significance. That boundary bridge and other That boundary bridge and the others like it have made the 10th commandment well nigh fall from the tables. I had often observed the water below the bridge from the bridge. Many a hearty trout fed there under the trees, but never an angler in those days. Pick it up from there. I had often observed the water below the bridge from the bridge. Many a hearty trout fed there under the trees, but never an angler in those days seemed to ply his craft, or lack of it, on the commodious downward sloping bank. There was only about 100 yards of this desirable water. Below could be seen a mill obscured by bushes, and below that was mystery. More hearty trout, probably, with gushing mill tails and dark pools. I had often speculated on these things, and coveted furiously my neighbour's goods, depreciating you. Depreciating the straight half miles and the curly corner that needed no speculation and held no mystery. And on this day I turned my back on the known and started for the unknown. By 9:30 a.m. I was kneeling on the grassy bank of the water below the bridge, watching a rising trout. There was no mayfly yet, so I offered him a wickham. I do not think he could ever have seen one before, so impressed was he, and so eagerly did he rise. He weighed 3/4 of a pound, and I returned him. I have never been quite sure why, because he was the first fish of the day, and sizable as they went in that river, but I think I was ashamed to kill a trout which had never seen a wickham before. Above the bridge the fish could have told me in the name of him who tied it, which I did not know myself. After this, I'm throwing that away. Above the bridge, the fish could have told me the name of him, not he who tied it. Above the bridge, the fish could have told me the name of him who tied it, which I did not know myself. After this, I found another trout which had never seen a wickham before, and returned him too. Then I hooked and lost one, and set off to explore behind the mill. Here, as I had imagined, was gushing water, and here were dark pools, 2 of them. In the mill pool, casting at a venture, I hooked a 4th trout, which got off, and rose a 5th. The wickham was, I am almost certain, The wickham was, I am almost certain, unknown to them too, but I did not experiment further, returning to the upper stretch when I had ascertained that trees and bushes made fishing in the channels below the pools impossible. Having returned, I put on a mayfly, whose name suggested liberal opinions, and I hoped liberal rewards, and waited for the drakes to hatch out. This they did about midday, and the hearty trout rushed to dinner at once. Literally rushed. When trout rush, I lose my head, and I made every mistake that the dry fly angler can make. My proceedings, set out in due order and classified, would fill a textbook, whose novel and valuable design should be to teach the novice what he should do by the process of negation. He should not do everything that I did. Whatever else he might do would be orthodox and correct. Despite all this, however, by lunchtime I had landed 5 brace, averaging about 1 pound. The rest of the fish in that water I had... excuse me, another burp time. Post-lunch burps. Cool. A couple of people in. Hope you're enjoying yourselves. It would help if I knew where... burp. Where's my 5 brace? There we go. I'm down there with my 5 brace. Okay, here we go. The rest of the fish in that water I had risen and missed, or lost, except 2, which were so far under a tree that I could not get at them. I put a fly just over each of the... I put a fly just over each of them, however, in the tree, and now I can do more with that. I put a fly just over each of them, however, in the tree, and left it there. Of the 10 fish, I only killed 1.5 pounds. The curious feeling of shame was still upon me. I was convinced that none of those trout had ever seen an artificial mayfly before, and, even if they had seen hundreds, I did not feel justified in keeping them after the exhibition I had made of myself. I went off to lunch in a mood bordering on irritation, and did not come back to the water till after tea, when another hatch of fly might be expected. In the evening, I fished the 2 pools alternately. Alternately? Alternately. That's an interesting thought. Alternately. Alternately. Okay. In the evening, I fished the 2 pools alternately, and landed 5 brace more, whereof I again only kept 1 fish, and for the same reasons. Never, I should say, did an angler do so little with such opportunities. The trout simply tumbled over one another to get at the fly, while I did my level best to prevent them by every expedient forbidden in the books. The fish landed were simply those my incompetence could not avoid. The one I kept weighed 1.25 pounds. At last, with still an hour of daylight, I gave it up and departed. I had caught 10 brace of fish with the mayfly, but was nevertheless a humiliated and beaten man. Then occurred one of those redeeming circumstances that relieve life's dark moments as lightning relieves the night. Parallel with the river, and owning its own bridge some 50 yards away, runs a small brook, and it holds trout. On the bridge I lingered, and perceived 2 feeding fish a few yards apart upstream. Pick it up from hand. And perceived 2 feeding fish a few yards apart upstream. To reach them, I had to enter the garden of a cottage and kneel among prickly gooseberry bushes. It was difficult casting, for the trout lay in narrow channels between weeds, and there was a hedge close behind the rod. The whole day long I had been busy demonstrating that this sort of thing was beyond me, yet I caught both those fish in a few minutes, and I did it in a way which was creditable, though I make the observation who obviously should not, though I make the... though I make the observation who obviously should not. One weighed 1.25 pounds, and the other 2.5 pounds. Truly, angling is a strange business. 4. The Immortals. Where the itchin takes its revenges and spreads abroad after too long confinement between... Where the itchin takes its revenges and spreads abroad after too long confinement between the straight borders of high banks and a railway cutting, there lie they There lie they, by 1, by 2, by 3, the immortals of the water. They lie there always, and are 3 pounds apiece. One supposes they have always lain there, and have always been 3 pounds apiece, notwithstanding the tongues of the irreverent, who have been known to hint that they are no more unapproachable than other fish, and that, given the right quality of breeze, something of an easterly tendency with mildness, and given a decent hatch of fly, and given that exact shade of red quill which one... pick it up there. And given that exact shade of red quill which one once saw in another man's box and has never... flash fly, and given that exact shade of red quill which one once saw in another man's box and has never been able to match since, they themselves, but their sayings are mere speculation, and nothing to the point. There is indeed legend of a master who came to the water in company with one of the irreverent, worked upstream without much success, and finally came to a place whence the immortals could be seen feeding, by one, by two, by three. The master knew nothing of the genius loci, and remarked in a matter-of-fact tone that one of them at least ought to be amenable to persuasion. So he knelt upon one knee and dispatched his very own particular brand of olive with his very own particular cut into the wind. From this point, in proper course, the story should lead up to a pretty moral about Homer nodding, pride preceding a calamity, or something of that kind. But, as a matter of legend, it does nothing of the sort. The irreverent maintain that the master slew those fish by one, by two, and by three, and that this only proves that it is not so much the fly as the fisher, that it is not so much the fisher as the fly, that only one man could have done it, that any man could have done it, that it proves, in fact, anything which needs proving on any side in any argument touching difficult fish. And certainly matters do strike one differently in different chairs and on different hearthrugs. But as concerns the immortals, there is a weakness in the history. The master's leash weighed but 7 pounds and 3 ounces together, whereas the immortals, as has been stated, weigh, and must always have weighed, 3 pounds apiece, which calculation will show to make an aggregate of 9 pounds. Also, they are there now. Therefore, whatever the master may have done, he cannot have captured the immortals. No one, of course, has done so. Some have tried. The author of this apologetic, panegyric, or whatever it is, has tried. Also, he has watched another, one of the irreverent, trying. It is pleasant, says the poet, from the security of the shore to watch others in distress upon the vasty deep, though, as a matter of fact, where the immortals are is not, are it is. Though, as a matter of fact, where the immortals are, it is not deep, but shallow, which may have something to do with it. But the simile serves well enough, both for the pleasure and the distress. There is a coign of vantage just opposite to the fish from which you can take this pleasure, behind herbage in a ditch. You get to it by way of the ditch, and you conceal your head in the herbage so that you can see the immortals on a bright day without their seeing you. But you cannot cover them from there by reason of the herbage and the drag. It is doubtful if even the master could. To cover them, you must kneel far away downstream on knobby lumps of chalk, which is not at all comfortable, and you must keep your shoulders low, and your head lower, and your rod lowest, and you must cast 22 yards at least, and the wind must be blowing into your face, or the immortals will not be feeding, and you must make allowances for the fact that the fish are in a bay where the water is slack, while your line is extended over a rapid glide, and in no wise able to linger in sympathy with the fly. There is every material for distress. But some men know no hesitations, and that other had built him a new fly, one of those super-imagines whose hackles blaze red at one angle, light yellow at another, gold at another, and so forth. An irresistible fly indeed to all fish of ordinary curiosity. So he approached to the attack with confidence, crept up to the knobby ridge of chalk, and then knelt on his right knee. That was a lot. Okay. Meanwhile, the immortals, each some 4 yards apart from each, fed in a stately row, one at the head, another in the middle, and the third at the tail of the little bay. Big swallow there we don't need. They were all plainly visible to the observer, whose feet were in the ditch and whose head among the herbage, for the sun was doing them honour. The angler did not open the campaign all at once. He transferred himself and his weight rather suddenly to his left knee, and laid his rod down that he might rub the right. Soon after he had to rub the left, and his face was as the face of one who suffers. Without knee pads, knobby lumps of chalk are not every man's hassock. Finally, he patted the ground and tried kneeling on both knees. This seemed rather more successful, and the rod was taken up. As an exhibition of underhand casting, the extending of line was very pretty, but unhappily, just as enough had been got out, the fly took hold of the clump of rushes growing behind the rod. Thereupon the angler had to creep away, release the hook, and then begin again. Bit of a swallow, bit of an itch. A position of comparative comfort, once lost, is not easily regained without knee pads, so it was. We can do a bit more with that. A position of comparative. A position of comparative comfort, once lost, is not easily regained without knee pads, so it was considerably Go again. A position of comparative comfort, once lost, is not easily regained without knee pads, so it was considerably later when the line at last swept backwards and forwards. This time the rod was held higher, on account, no doubt, of the reeds, and it may have been for this reason that before ever the fly fell the lowest. No, before ever the fly fell. Burp. This time the rod was held higher, on account, no doubt, of the reeds, and it may have been for this reason that before ever the fly fell, the lowest immortal stopped feeding, turned, and went away. Made aware of this by the onlooker, the angler crept on a few yards for a tack on the second fish, which was still rising, and again sought diligently for a spot where kneeling was not an agony. He had just found it when the second immortal, after a second or two of evident thought, also turned and went away. The third fish continued to feed, and the angler crawled a little nearer, found a kneeling place, got out his line, and at last placed the fly beautifully about 6 inches in front of his enemy's nose. It was not taken, but he turned, didn't he? The angler felt able to ask. This was a fact, and the observer was able to answer, yes. But truth constrained him to add that the third immortal had merely turned, like his fellows, for the purpose of departure, and that further efforts would be useless. Such are the immortals, and such, as their humble chronicler knows, and that further efforts would be useless. Such are the immortals, and such, as their humble chronicler knows too well from his own proper experience, is the lot of those who would outwit them. It may be that the bank shakes, it may be that they have eyes in their tails. Whatever may be the cause of their security, there they lie always, by 1, by 2, by 3, and £3 apiece. 5. The Evening Rise. The angler is a hopeful mortal who ought to know better, and the evening rise is a delusion based on his weak readiness to believe all good things of the time that is coming. Also, there never was a river better named than the Test. If an angler should win through 4 days on this river, taken when leisure permitted and in malign consequence when the conditions were uniformly unfavourable, without having his patience tried to the breaking point, set him down as the angler who is indeed complete. The Itchin has a name full of irritating possibilities, and it does its best to desert. I see what he's doing here. Very clever. The Itchin has a name full of irritating possibilities, and it does its best to deserve it. The Itchin has a name full of irritating possibilities, and it does its best to deserve it. But the other has something of solemnity in its designation, as befits a stream whose trout are of greater size, and whose fascination for the fisherman is so much the more irresistible. Yet, patience or no patience, an invitation to fish the test is a thing to accept by telegram, for there are days when the fish rise boldly and the angler fills his creel with 3-pounders. Other men have these days, so one is sure of it. Also, there is the evening rise. One has this oneself, though it somehow differs from other people's, if one may judge from their stirring accounts. The comparison of experiences is always... It was a bit sloppy on the zzz. The comparison of experiences is always useful, so a description of 4 varieties of the evening rise witnessed on the test may not be amiss. The first was nearly at the end of June, after an amazingly hot day, as hot days go in England now. A northwesterly breeze and a conspicuous lack of fly had kept the fish down, except for 1 or 2 old stagers that were feeding lazily and safely on black smuts, whose microscopic size forbade imitation. But in the evening the wind dropped, the sky became a glorious expanse of gold and rose as the sun sank, and the rise seemed a moral certainty. Placed by my friend's kindness at the very best spot on his water, a gliding shallow above the weir on which the 3-pounders were wont to dine, is it wont or want? I never know this. Won't. Won't, yeah. Pick it up from there. Placed by my friend's kindness at the very best spot on his water, a gliding shallow above the weir on which 3-pounders were wont to dine, I esteemed myself fortunate, and was almost immediately rewarded by seeing a rise. Creeping into a position among some rushes below the fish, I covered him with a medium-sized blue dun, which he took without hesitation. But the luck was on his side. Though he was apparently well hooked, and though the line never slackened, the hook came away after his first magnificent rush, and I realized that 1 3-pounder at least was not mine. I withdrew sadly and made my way upstream towards a bend where, above a piece of camp sheathing, a big fish had been spotted in the daytime. The evening light made it possible to see a rise from a long distance, and I soon marked a ring in the desired spot, close under my own bank. But alas, even as I marked it, something else claimed attention, a thin veil of mist that seemed to be coming downstream. I ran, but the mist... reached him before I did, and he rose no more. The fatal mist then moved on to spoil the rest of the water, and, though 1 2-pounder rewarded a desperate race to the shallow below the weir, the evening rise may be said to have ended before it had really begun, and not another trout moved. The next day was not unlike the first, except that it was not quite so hot and rather more windy. The evening sky was again glorious, but again, just as the fish seemed likely to feed, the mist made an unwelcome appearance. Before it rose, however, I just had time to hook with a big wickham the trout above the camp sheathing, and to lose him. It is most depressing to lose a big fish when time is precious. It encourages a fatalistic anticipation of failure, which is bad for the basket. Patches of the baleful mist and a total absence of rising fish did not help matters, but there remained one chance, a small side stream which was really a backwater of the main river. This had a fair evening reputation, and from the distance it seemed as yet to be free from mist. I therefore hurried over the meadow towards the bridge which crossed it. Here, sure enough, were fish rising, and rising well, and a big sedge seemed appropriate to the hour, as several were fluttering around about. and a big sedge seemed appropriate to the hour, as several were fluttering about the banks. But the trout would not look at it, though they continued to rise steadily at something invisible, nor would they move at a silver sedge of smaller size, nor at a still smaller blue quill. At last, in sheer desperation, I put on the smallest blue dun in the box, and at once rose and hooked a trout that had refused all the other flies. He fought like a thing possessed, and, though he was only 1.5 pounds, he had to be handled judiciously on the tiny hook. Judicious handling means loss of time, and before I had him in the net, the mist was upon us. At a signal, every trout in the stream. As at a signal, every trout in the stream stopped feeding, and the second evening rise was over. The third evening rise was experienced a week later on another side stream after a thundery, flyless, fishless day. It consisted of a single dimple caused by a grayling, and I did not see it myself, but a friend who did took full advantage of it, and the fish was a fine specimen of 2 pounds 6 ounces. I believe, however, that the trows, lovely fish, trows. I believe, however, that the trout rose for half an hour after we had. I believe, however, that the trout rose for half an hour after we had gone, an event for which they were, no doubt, waiting. The keeper said next day, not said the next day. The keeper said next day that it was quite a pleasure to watch them. The fourth day was again devoted to the main river. The sky was heavy with rain all the morning and afternoon, but about 5 o'clock it began to clear up, and by 7 p.m. a lovely evening was assured. At last I was to see a real evening rise. It was begun by a good fish under the opposite bank, which came up continuously and voraciously until a small silver sedge floated over him. I don't like that. Until a small silver sedge floated over him. He then came up no more. I attributed this to my having dropped the fly too close to him, and resolved to be more careful with the next trout, which was rising equally steadily about 20 yards higher up. I covered him with a really excellent cast. The fly dropped as lightly as thistledown. The fly dropped as... That was a nasty F. The fly dropped as lightly as thistledown 5 feet above him, floated directly over his nose without the least suspicion of a drag, and put him down at once. This convinced me that the silver sedge was not the fly, and I changed it for an olive quill, which put down a third fish every bit as speedily. A wickham put down a fourth, and a black hackle put down a fifth, while a big red sedge put down 2 at one cast. Then I began to have doubts, and put on a blue dun, as what fly was on the water seemed to be of that character. This invaluable pattern put down a dozen fish with promptitude, and my doubts increased, but there seemed to be no valid reason for changing it. At last I reached the top of my beat, a big pool shelving out onto a perfect shallow. Here numbers of fish were feeding on a splendid batch of duns, which were plainly visible against the sky. My own fly was visible too, and it looked exactly like the naturals. It put down those fish one by one until only about 6 continued to feed. 5 of them were beyond my reach, and one, a monster, seemed to care nothing about my fly. He was rising just on the edge of the rapid at the head of the pool, and the blue dun passed over him several times, leaving him unmoved. My friend, who, being a better fisherman than I, had succeeded in putting down all the fish in his own section more quickly and had come down to watch me, questioned my ability to frighten this fish, but I was not convinced. I looked through my fly box and found an enormous red sedge built for the kennet. This I tied on and cast out, and I am pleased to say it put the monster down at once. After this we went home with the consciousness of something accomplished, but I cannot speak highly of the evening rise as I have found it. Okay, on we go. Where are we? Just gone 3 o'clock. Okay. 6. Hooked and lost. The angler should be beware of those tags of proverbial philosophy which have, insensibly almost, attached themselves to his craft. Chief amongst Chief among them is that Chief among them is that fallacious parody which insists in seasoned and out. Come on, go again. Chief among them is that fallacious parody which insists in season and out that it is better to have hooked and lost than never to have hooked at all. There is probably no short sentence that has wrought more havoc with many a serene temper than this idol of the water meadow. Idol of the water meadow, as, after the ancient fashion, it might be called. On the face of it, it seems so reasonable. We do not, one reflects in the study, fish for slaughter. We have no lust for blood. We are contemplative men, interested in the way of a trout with a fly. To have a way with a fly, a trout must be alive. The row of corpses on the dish is... To have a way with a fly, a trout must be alive. The row of corpses on the dish at even is but an accident, a regrettable accident almost, but to be endured, since it shows that we have contemplated the day through to some purpose, and because a sordidly material world demands that theory should sometimes be supported with proofs. Dead trout, in short, are proofs, statistics, tables, things wholly alien from the high thinking of our profession. We would just as soon be without them. So reason we at home, in the train, and even at the waterside, until reason goes reeling under the first buffet of misfortune. The account of some typical events on the Itchen may serve to illustrate the futility of proverbial philosophy such as this, begotten of a taste for juggling with words and nurtured by a habit of compromising with truth. In the morning, fate was on the side of error. Never a fish would look at anything, though there were rises in plenty and fly in abundance. Olives, reds, blues, gingers, and the shades between. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's go again. Olives, reds, blues, gingers, and the shades between were tried conscientiously, but the trout might have all been dead in a dish for the response they gave. The thought arose that it is better to have hooked and lost than never to have hooked at all, and it seemed a good thought. To it succeeded temptation, and old vows solemnly taken became of no... Old vowels? Don't think so. To it succeeded. What's he saying with that sentence? Okay. To it succeeded temptation, and old vows, solemnly taken, became of no account. In short, a fly on a triple O hook was knotted to the cast and, as all dry fly anglers, save for the very few born lucky, know, this is a sure road to hook and to lose. Ex nihilo nil fit. Treble nothings catch naught. Oddly enough, however, the first fish that rose at the tiny blue upright was caught, and the toy hook was found for once in a way to have taken firm hold. But it was only a small fish, and scarcely sizable, so in it went again. The second fish rose, and was not hooked. The third, a good one, lay under the opposite bank in a wide place, and it needed a superhuman cast to reach it. But a puff of wind aided, the fly fell right. The trout. What's going on there? Go back. But a puff of wind aided. The fly fell right. The trout rose boldly, and in a moment was tearing downstream. Gradually, line was wound in, and the fish manoeuvred across through a sparse bed of rushes, over weeds, and into a clear run under the near side. The folding net was opened, the rod bent to the final strain, and then the fly came easily away, while the fish remained exhausted, just out of reach. It is better to have hooked and lost than never. But the saying seemed inadequate. But the saying seemed inadequate at the moment, and ended in vigorous but irrelevant Saxon. The next fish was feeding under the near bank, and in an easy position. It took the fly like a lamb, gave 2 kicks, and was also gone. There was a moment of silence, and then, in a still, small voice came, "It is better to have hooked." But the sentiment faded away at that point. Upstream some 50 yards, and sheltered from the wind by a spinney, was a broad shallow, and on it fed 5 trout, all good ones, and all within reach from one spot. The first took the blue upright as though it had been waiting for it all day. It ran, jumped, tumbled, and finally gave in, submitting to be drawn netwards, a good 2-pounder. 2-pounder. It ran. It ran, jumped, tumbled, and finally gave in, submitting to be drawn netwards, a good 2-pounder. Then the fly came away as the net was being lowered to the stream. Again there was a silence, and again an effort was made to snatch consolation out of verbiage. "It is better." But it was obviously not better, so nothing further was said in that vein. None of the other fish on the shallow would look at the blue upright, so several other flies were put over them, flies large and flies small. At last, a double-hooked black midge, warranted to have hooking powers extraordinary, rose the biggest trout of the 5, held it for a second or two, and came away fatigued. "It," began the angler with heroism, but that was the last word of proverbial philosophy. Pick it up from the butt. Pick it up from there. But that was the last word of proverbial philosophy that day. A sentence beginning with "it" can finish in so many ways that it is useless to choose the least appropriate ending. And besides, something had to be said about the black midge before it was taken off. A wickham on a number 1 hook took its place. The last fish of the 5, being somewhat above the rest, had not been disturbed by the struggles of its fellows, and still continued to feed heartily. It was just above a solitary rush, always a likely position for a free riser, and it took the wickham at once with an eager plunge. At last it seemed that a decent trout was destined for the creel, for it played deep and steadily. And then, without warning, that wickham on a number 1 hook came away just as though it had been a treble nothing. And yet there are people who will maintain that it is better to have hooked. But even now the words are But even now the words are too full of bitterness for further iteration. 7. August. The dry fly is an exalted thing, and no doubt makes for exalted moods in them that use it. It is grand to feel that one is captain of one's soul, that one can await the beginning of the rise with calm expectancy, unruffled by the fret and fever of those... That's another long sentence. Let's chop in here. Unruffled by the fret and fever of those to whom fly fishing means 24 hours of creeping and crawling with 3 sparsely hackled flies ever in the water. The dry fly, in fact, touches the heights of philosophy. But take the case of a dry fly stream, sulky at all times in August. Thunder is about. There are squalls of wind just enough to ruffle the surface of the glide where one fancies one saw a grayling dimple during a brief spell of... Oh, that's another long one. Find somewhere to breathe there. Pick it up from there. There are squalls of wind just enough to ruffle the surface of the glide where one fancies one saw a grayling dimple during a brief spell... Spell, not a smell. Idiot man. There are squalls of wind just enough to ruffle the surface of the glide where one fancies one saw a grayling dimple during a brief spell of calm. The fly, there is no fly. The trout, there are no trout, or if there are, during the mayfly they were visible enough. Poseidon alone knows where they are hid. Moorhens, coots, and dab chicks scuttle about in irritating fashion. That wave, or rather those waves, are an eloquent testimony. Wave, or rather those waves, are eloquent testimony that Esox Lucius is on the warpath. That, or rather, those waves are eloquent testimony. Come on. Or rather, those waves are eloquent testimony that Esox Lucius is on the warpath. Plague take him. It is now 4:30 p.m., and since 9 a.m. there has not been a single honest rise of honest fish to break the surface. Or, in the words of a great and knowledge... beyond the border, so with Scots, right? Or, as is the driftly, okay. Well, I'm gonna have to chop that. Well, in the words of a great and knowledgeable band of fishermen beyond the border, as your driftly, eh? To be candid, it is stuck in the little ring on the butt, and there it has been all day, save at a few desperate junctures when it has been chucking and chancing over the hot... Go from save. Save at a few desperate junctures where it has been chucking and chancing over the inhospitable waters. One fish came at... I didn't like that. Save at a few desperate junctures. Save at a few desperate junctures where it has been chucking and chancing over the inhospitable waters. One fish came at it at 11:50 a.m., but by reason of the mathematical truth that the less is able... I need to try as well. Slurp, yep. But by reason of the mathematical truth that the less is unable to contain the greater, nothing was born of the proceeding. Had the fly gone for the... Had the fly gone for the fish... Had the fly gone for the fish, belike result would have been more patent. Tea, that modest stimulant... I don't feel I've really nailed that last one. What's going on here? Undo that. Right, I'm not happy with that. It doesn't make enough sense. But by reason of the mathematical truth that the less is unable to contain the greater, nothing was born of the proceeding. Had the fly gone for the fish, belike result would have been more patent. Tea, that modest stimulant and the comfort that comes of it. Many a dark mood has been charmed away by the brown teapot and the daintily spread table in the keeper's cottage. Many a dark mood has been charmed away by the brown teapot and the daintily spread table in the keeper's cottage. Besides, there is a book on a shelf of which a few pages are bound to encourage making a fishery. Really, it is absurdly easy to make a fishery, one reflects as one reads and find out. Uh, Really, it is absurdly easy to make a fishery, one reflects as one reads and finds out how it is done. The only wonder is that more people have not performed the small feat. All one has to do is to cut weeds, kill pike, put in trout, with discretion, and having done it, there only remains the catching of them. That is all. Here it is now 5 p.m., and we have been at that game all day. Something is needed besides making your fishery. You must make your rise of fly, and your feeding fish, and your favourable weather. Even then, probably 5 p.m. would come upon you with something still unmade and your fish uncaught. These meditations last over the first cup of tea. With the second, the heart begins to expand. On a nail by the mantelpiece hangs a battered pike bait. That's a hard one. No, Matt and Oren don't think it's that easy, I'm sure. It's a shame they don't, they're not here for this one. We'll point them towards it. On a nail, not the nail. On a nail by the... No, clipped over it, hold on. Is there another little bit there? Yes, there is, excuse me. Let's go again. On a... No, I can't say two words. On a nail by the mantelpiece hangs a battered pike bait, a wagtail. Esox's fate is as good as sealed when the keener weather comes along. It is a bloodthirsty, comforting thought. By the wagtail. By the wagtail hangs an old pair of grey wings, a sometime artificial mayfly. Come on, use your words. By the wagtail hangs an old pair of grey wings, a sometime artificial mayfly. No, it's still not right. By the wagtail hangs an old pair of grey wings, a sometime artificial mayfly, the same, it may be, that lured the 5-pounder which fed by the post 20 yards above the bridge. A notable capture was that. It makes one sigh for the roses and raptures of June. It befell just after tea, one has heard, the time of all others to get a big fish, for it leaves some hours for the making of that brace which all men covet, the par nobile fratrum of their dreams. A third cup of tea, the weather being so hot and thundery, and the heart mellows still more. Why, it was after tea that the 5-pounder was caught, and even in August there are hours after tea. There should be an evening rise by all the rules, and the blank may yet be broken. So up and away... Itchy nose. So up and away to the bridge with hope renewed. From the bridge, the long shallow. From the bridge, the long shallow is visible. On it are a big grayling. Let me get a chop in there. On it are a big grayling, and were not a few ponderous trout. At 5:30, the former should begin to rise, at 6:30, the latter, and so till dark. And so till dark there will be no lack of employment. Ah, there, 60 yards a bay. 60 yards. Oh, Liz is going to make some tea. Lovely. I may well finish something here and come and have a cup of tea with you. Let's see if we can... Ah, there, 60 yards away is a big, swirling ring. The 3-pound grayling, surely. Yes, and again. He will undoubtedly rise at a fly cunningly presented. The stile in the hedge must be climbed and the meadow crossed circuitously, lest heavy footsteps near the bank alarm the fish. Now for a subtle approach on 2 knees and 1 hand. Lo! The commotion again just outside that solitary rush. But alas! What is that? An impudent little head, raised for a moment and then gone, bewrays the dabchick. It was not the 3-pound grayling at all, and further consideration shows that there is not a rise on all the shallow, except from the tiny trout that feed all day just below the bridge. At this bitter moment of realization, the rain sees its opportunity, and the edge of that storm which has been brewing all day breaks without warning. A hurried flight back to the hedge saves a complete drenching, but when the downpour is over, half an hour later, there is an uneasy dampness about the shoulders. No matter, the storm is gone by, and the west is brightening for sunset. Presently the big sedges will be coming out, and careful casting into the lane of afterglow will surely have its reward. Meanwhile, on the shallows, there is a real rise from a real fish, followed by another. He feeds at last. A ginger quill, and he comes short. A red quill, and he comes short. Other flies, and he comes not at all. He feeds no more. His fellows do not feed at all, and there are no more rises on the shallow. It is 7 p.m., so now for the upper water, the sedge, and that monster that broke 2 mayfly casts. He lies at a corner outside the rushes, and comes up with a bang or two 3 times every likely evening. He is quite a possibility. But what is the matter with the river? It rises, surely. Yes, and it has a disordered appearance. Driftweeds, masses of them, obscure its surface. There is scarcely room for a floating fly between. It is the sudden rise of the water that has moved this debris from its resting places, and fully half an hour must elapse before the surface is clear again. However, it is still early for the sedge, and horror! There in the distance is a white something rising above the banks. It is the mist, a good hour before its appointed time, a result, no doubt, of the heavy rain. All is over, and so home. Let us study Mr. Halford once more, and see if he tells us how to make a fishery where there will... Pick that up for now. Let us study Mr. Halford once more, and see if he tells us how to make a fishery where there shall be no dabchicks, and no sudden rain, and no rising water, and no floating meads, and no mist. Yes, and no August fishing. Okay, I'm going to save that off for now. There is a cup of tea being offered to me back at the house, so I am going to go and have that. I hope you enjoy this video either now or later on. If you have enjoyed it, if you want to carry on seeing stuff, don't forget, like and subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. And I may be able to get another one in today, and I may not, because we've got stuff to do. Other than that, see you on Monday coming, which will be, what are we, the 21st day, 22nd, 23rd, 24th of February. 2 p.m. Central European. Let's try that again. 24th, Monday the 24th of February 2025 will be coming up at 2 p.m. Central European, 1 p.m. GMT, that's 8 a.m. EST. Great. Have a great weekend, everyone. There we go.